The dust-laden wind brought more than just the scent of sage and gunpowder to Aurora Dawson's nostrils as she lay crumpled against the weathered boards of her father's general store. Blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with the dirt beneath her cheek. Her stepbrother's boot pressed down on her shoulder, grinding her already battered body further into the ground. "You're worthless, Aurora, too weak to even stand up for yourself," Jacob snarled, delivering a final kick to her ribs before striding away. "Pa should have left you at that orphanage where you belonged." The Montana Territory of 1878 was unforgiving to most, but especially to young women without family to protect them. At 20 years old, Aurora had endured her stepbrother's cruelty since her father's death 3 months prior. With no blood relation to bind them, Jacob had made it clear he considered her nothing but a burden, one he intended to be rid of soon enough. As the boot's steps faded, Aurora pushed herself up slowly, wincing at the sharp pain in her side. The store was empty, thankfully. No customers to witness her humiliation. She limped to the wash basin behind the counter, dabbing at her face with trembling hands. The bell above the door jingled, and Aurora hastily smoothed her apron, trying to appear composed despite her swollen cheek and red-rimmed eyes. "Afternoon, Miss Dawson." The deep voice belonged to Samuel Prescott, a rancher who'd settled in Willow Creek just last spring. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that contradicted his rugged appearance, he removed his hat respectfully as he approached the counter. Aurora kept her face downturned. "Mr. Prescott, what can I help you with today?" Just needing some coffee beans, and he stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on her face. "Miss Dawson, you're hurt." "It's nothing," she replied too quickly. "Just clumsy is all," walked into the door. Samuel's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. Aurora had seen that look before, pity mingled with discomfort, the expression people wore before they politely pretended not to notice. But Samuel's gaze held something else, something that looked dangerously like anger. "That's not a door injury," he said quietly. "That's from a fist." Aurora's hands trembled as she measured coffee beans into a paper sack. "Your imagination is running wild, Mr. Prescott. Now, will there be anything else?" Instead of answering, he reached across the counter, his calloused fingers gently lifting her chin. Aurora flinched but didn't pull away as his thumb lightly brushed the edge of her bruise. "Jacob?" Samuel asked, his voice tight. Aurora's eyes widened. "How did you seen his type before?" Samuel's mouth set in a grim line. "Men who only feel strong when they're making others feel weak." Tears threatened, but Aurora blinked them back. "It doesn't matter, nothing to be done about it." "There's always something to be done." Samuel placed a few coins on the counter, far more than the coffee beans were worth. "And you're stronger than you think, Miss Dawson." Before she could respond, the door swung open again and Jacob stalked in, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Samuel. "Prescott," Jacob acknowledged coldly. Samuel nodded slightly, placing his hat back on his head. "Dawson," he turned to Aurora. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Dawson. I'll be back tomorrow to check on that order we discussed." After Samuel departed, Jacob rounded on her. "What order? What did he want?" "Just coffee beans," Aurora replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Jacob's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You stay away from Prescott. He's got his eye on this store, and I ain't selling to the likes of him." Aurora said nothing, but inside, a tiny ember of defiance glowed brighter. Samuel Prescott had truly seen her, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. That night, Aurora lay awake in her small room above the store, listening to Jacob's snores from the adjacent bedroom. Her fingers traced the worn leather of her father's journal, the only keepsake she had managed to hide from Jacob's greedy hands. Inside was a deed one her father had mentioned before his passing for a small plot of land outside town. Land that was rightfully hers, though Jacob had claimed everything as his own after their father died. With trembling hands, she slipped the journal into a small bag along with her mother's silver hairbrush and a change of clothes. She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to escape before Jacob made good on his threat to marry her off to old Mr. Winters. a widower 40 years her senior with wandering hands and a reputation for breaking his last wife's spirit. The floorboards creaked as Aurora eased down the back stairs and slipped out into the moonlit night. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains. Freedom, however brief it might be, tasted sweet on her tongue as she hurried down the alley behind the buildings. She had nearly reached the edge of town when a hand clamped over her mouth. Aurora struggled, her heart hammering against her ribs as she was dragged backward into the shadows. "Where do you think you're going?" Jacob's whiskey-laden breath burned her ear. "Thought you could just run off with Pa's store and everything in it." Aurora bit down hard on his hand. Jacob cursed, releasing her momentarily, but not before backhanding her across the face. She stumbled, her vision blurring as she tasted blood. "I'm not stealing anything," she gasped. "The deed to the homestead is mine. Pa left it to me." Jacob laughed cruelly. "You think anyone's going to believe that? A weak little girl like you can't own property." He grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully behind her back. "You're coming home, and tomorrow you'll marry Winters. He's willing to pay good money for you, and I aim to collect." "Let her go, Dawson." The voice cut through the darkness like a knife. Samuel stood a few paces away, his stance wide and confident, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Jacob sneered. "This ain't your business, Prescott." "She's my sister, and she's coming home." "Stepsister," Aurora corrected through gritted teeth. "And I'm not your property." "She's right," Samuel said evenly. "Let her go, or we'll see if you're as brave against someone who can fight back." For a moment, the only sound was the distant piano from the saloon. Then Jacob shoved Aurora toward Samuel, causing her to stumble. "Take her then. She's nothing but trouble, too weak to run the store, too stubborn to know her place. She'll be crawling back when she realizes how hard life is without my charity." Samuel steadied Aurora with a gentle hand at her elbow. "She's strong enough to walk away from you. That takes more courage than you'll ever know." Jacob spat on the ground between them. "We'll see how strong she is when winter comes." He turned and stalked back toward town, his figure gradually swallowed by the darkness. When he was gone, Aurora's knees finally gave way. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her up into his arms with surprising tenderness for such a large man. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." Aurora wanted to protest that she didn't need carrying, that she could walk just fine, but exhaustion and relief overwhelmed her. Instead, she allowed her head to rest against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and pine. "Where were you planning to go?" Samuel asked as he carried her toward the livery stable where his horse waited. "I don't know," Aurora admitted. "I just knew I couldn't stay. Jacob arranged for me to marry Mr. Winters tomorrow." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "Old Harrison Winters, the man's a brute." "I know." "That's why I ran." Aurora's voice caught. "I have a deed to a homestead outside town. My father left it to me, but Jacob claimed everything when Pa died." Samuel set her down gently beside his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding that nickered softly. "Do you have the deed with you?" Aurora nodded, clutching her small bag. "In my father's journal, but it won't matter. Jacob will just say I stole it." "Not if we get it registered in your name at the territorial office in Helena." Samuel's eyes held a determined glint. "I'm heading there tomorrow with a small cattle drive." "You could come along." Aurora stared at him, unable to comprehend his offer. "Why would you help me? You barely know me." Samuel's expression softened. "Sometimes you just know when something's right." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've watched you these past months, seen how you keep that store running despite Jacob's neglect. How you help Mrs. Wilkins with her children when she's ailing. How you taught Billy Thompson to read when the school teacher gave up on him." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You might think you're weak because that's what Jacob's been telling you, but I've seen your strength, Aurora, and if you'll let me, I'd like to help you claim what's rightfully yours." Aurora's throat tightened with emotion. No one had spoken to her with such respect since her father died. No one had seen past her quiet demeanor to recognize her determination. "It'll be dangerous," she whispered. "Jacob won't let me go easily." Samuel smiled, a slow, confident curve of his lips that warmed Aurora from the inside out. "Then it's a good thing you won't be alone anymore." Dawn broke over the eastern hills as Aurora rode beside Samuel, her borrowed horse keeping pace with his buckskin. Behind them, 4 ranch hands guided a small herd of cattle northward. The men had asked no questions when Samuel introduced Aurora as a friend in need of safe passage to Helena, though their curious glances suggested they had their suspicions. "We'll reach Miller's Creek by nightfall," Samuel told her, pointing toward distant mountains. "There's a trading post there where we can rest safely." Aurora nodded, trying to ignore the throbbing pain in her cheek and ribs. Jacob's final blows had left their mark, but with each mile that passed between them and Willow Creek, she felt a growing sense of liberation. Why cattle driving? She asked, partly to distract herself from her discomfort, partly out of genuine curiosity. "You seem educated, could have been a lawyer or businessman," Samuel chuckled. "Tried that life back east. My father was a banker in Boston, wanted me to follow in his footsteps." His expression grew distant. "After the war, couldn't stomach being confined inside 4 walls, answering to men who'd never seen what I'd seen." "You fought in the war." Aurora hadn't considered that the seemingly peaceful rancher might have a violent past. He nodded once. "Union cavalry." "4 years of hell that aged me a decade." His eyes met hers. "When it ended, I headed west, wanted open skies and honest work, found both." Aurora studied his profile, noticing for the first time the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "How old are you, Mr. Prescott?" 32 next month, and I think after rescuing you from an unwanted marriage you might call me Samuel." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made Aurora's heart beat a little faster. "Samuel," she tested the name on her tongue. "And you can call me Aurora, not Miss Dawson." "Aurora," he repeated, "suits you, like the dawn." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic plodding of hooves and occasional lowing of cattle the only sounds. The vast Montana landscape stretched around them, rolling hills carpeted with summer wildflowers, distant mountains etched against the blue sky, and not another soul in sight. For the first time in her life, Aurora felt truly free by mid-afternoon. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Samuel frowned at the sky. "Storm coming. We'll need to push harder to reach the trading post before it hits." They quickened their pace, but the weather moved faster. Within an hour, fat raindrops began to fall and thunder rumbled ominously. The cattle grew restless, and the drovers shouted commands as they worked to keep the herd together. "There's an old line shack about a mile east," called Hank, the oldest of the ranch hands. "Might be better to hole up there than risk the herd stampeding." Samuel nodded his agreement, and they changed course. The rain intensified, soaking through Aurora's thin coat. She shivered, gripping the reins with numb fingers as her horse picked its way through increasingly muddy terrain. Lightning cracked overhead, and Aurora's horse reared in fright. She clung desperately to its mane, but a second bolt sent the animal bolting. She heard Samuel shout her name as she was carried away, branches whipping past her face as the horse plunged into a stand of trees. "Whoa," Aurora pulled back on the reins, trying to calm the panicked animal. "Easy, easy." The horse slowed gradually, sides heaving. Just as Aurora thought she had regained control, a fallen log loomed in their path. The horse attempted to jump, but the muddy ground gave way beneath its hooves. Aurora felt herself sailing through the air, then impact as she hit the ground hard, knocking the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded in her ankle as she tried to stand. The horse had vanished, leaving her alone in the woods with rain pouring down and visibility diminishing by the minute. Aurora dragged herself beneath the partial shelter of a large pine, hugging her knees to her chest as she shivered violently. "Samuel," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. The rational part of her mind knew he would search for her, but fear whispered that she might never be found, that she would die here alone, having tasted freedom for less than a day. Time passed in a haze of cold and pain. Aurora's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and her thoughts grew sluggish. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, she wondered if she was imagining things. "Aurora," Samuel's voice penetrated the drumming rain. "Aurora, where are you?" she tried to call out, but her voice emerged as little more than a croak. Summoning her remaining strength, she pulled herself upright and limped toward the sound, each step sending shards of pain through her injured ankle. "Here," she managed finally. "I'm here." Samuel materialized through the rain like an apparition, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. He reached her just as her legs gave way, catching her against his chest. "I thought," his voice broke, "when your horse came back without you." Aurora could feel his heart hammering beneath her cheek. "I'm okay," she assured him, though she was far from it. "My ankle," without hesitation, Samuel lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, cradling her securely against him. One arm wrapped around her waist, the other controlling the reins as they set off through the storm. "The line shack is close," he murmured against her hair. "Just hold on a little longer." Aurora nodded weakly, letting herself sink into his warmth. Despite her pain and the continuing storm, she felt strangely safe within the circle of his arms. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a dirt floor and a small wood stove, but to Aurora, it looked like a palace. Samuel carried her inside, where Hank and the other drovers had already started a fire. The cattle were gathered in a natural depression nearby, as sheltered as possible from the elements. "She's freezing," Samuel said, setting her gently on a rough wooden bench. "Need to get her dry." Hank nodded, pulling extra blankets from his saddlebags. "I'll make some coffee." "Got some whiskey too, if she needs it." Samuel knelt before Aurora, his expression grave as he examined her swollen ankle. "Might be broken. Can you move your toes?" Aurora tried, wincing at the pain but relieved when her toes responded. "Just a bad sprain, I think. Still need to wrap it." Samuel looked up at her, concern etching lines between his brows. "And you need dry clothes before you catch your death." The problem of modesty in such close quarters was solved when the men tactfully stepped outside to check on the cattle, leaving Aurora alone to change into a flannel shirt Samuel had offered from his own pack. It swallowed her slender frame, falling nearly to her knees, but it was dry and carried his comforting scent. When the men returned, soaked and grumbling, Samuel immediately came to her side, wrapping her ankle with practiced efficiency. "Where did you learn to do that?" Aurora asked, distracted from the pain by his gentle touch. "War teaches you many things," he replied simply. "Some useful in peacetime too." He finished the bandage and moved to sit beside her, draping a blanket around both their shoulders. The other men busied themselves with coffee and a meager supper of jerky and hardtack, giving them as much privacy as the small space allowed. "I'm sorry about all this," Aurora whispered. "You wouldn't be stuck in this storm if not for me." Samuel's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Don't apologize for things that aren't your fault. The storm would have happened whether you were with us or not. But your cattle are worth less to me than your safety." His voice was low but fervent, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Aurora looked away first, overwhelmed by the emotion she saw there. "Why me? You could have any woman in the territory. Why risk everything for someone like me?" Samuel was silent for so long that Aurora thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was roughened with feeling. "My mother was like you once. Beautiful, kind, trapped in a marriage to a man who valued her only for what she could provide: social standing, a well-kept home, children to carry on his name." His jaw tightened. He never hit her, he was too civilized for that, but he broke her spirit just the same. Made her believe she was worthless without him. He took Aurora's hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I watched her fade year by year until there was nothing left but an empty shell going through the motions. When she died, my father remarried within 6 months, as if she'd been nothing more than a piece of furniture that needed replacing." Aurora squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the boy he had been, witnessing his mother's slow destruction. "I promised myself then that I would never be like him," Samuel continued, "and that if I ever found a woman with fire in her soul, I would do everything in my power to help that fire burn brighter, not smother it." He looked down at their joined hands. "When I saw you in that store, standing straight despite your bruises, serving customers with dignity while your stepbrother lounged about taking credit for your work, I recognized that fire. And when I saw him trying to beat it out of you." His voice hardened. I couldn't stand by and watch another good woman be destroyed by a man who fears her strength. Aurora's throat tightened with emotion. No one had ever seen her so clearly before. No one had recognized her quiet determination as strength rather than stubbornness. "I'm not as strong as you think," she whispered. "I was running away, not standing and fighting." "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away," Samuel countered. "It takes courage to leave everything you know, even when what you know is harmful." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Aurora's exhaustion caught up with her, and she found herself leaning more heavily against Samuel's solid warmth. "Rest," he murmured, shifting to make her more comfortable. "I'll keep watch." Aurora meant to protest that she wasn't tired, but her eyelids grew heavy, and the last thing she remembered was the feeling of Samuel's fingers gently stroking her hair. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a washed, clean world sparkling with raindrops. Aurora woke still nestled against Samuel's side, his arm protectively around her shoulders. The ranch hands were already outside, rounding up the cattle and preparing to move on. "Good morning," Samuel said softly when he noticed her stirring. "How's the ankle?" Aurora flexed it experimentally, grimacing at the stiffness. "Better, I think, still sore. We'll take it slow today." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she wobbled. "Hank says there's a creek about a mile ahead where you can wash up if you'd like." The cool water of the creek was refreshing against Aurora's skin as she bathed her face and arms, doing her best to make herself presentable. Her reflection in the still pool showed fading bruises, but also clear eyes that seemed somehow different, more confident, perhaps, or simply more hopeful than they had been 2 days ago. They reached Miller's Creek Trading Post by mid-afternoon. It was a substantial outpost with a general store, blacksmith, and even a small boarding house that catered to travelers along the Helena Road. Samuel secured a room for Aurora while he and his men camped with the cattle. "We'll rest here tonight," he told her as they sat on the boarding house porch after supper. "Then push on to Helena tomorrow, should reach it by nightfall if the weather holds." Aurora nodded, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "And then what?" Samuel glanced at her. "Then we get your deed registered at the territorial office, make it official that the homestead is yours." "I meant after that," Aurora clarified. "What happens after Helena?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "That depends on you, I suppose. You could sell the homestead, use the money to start fresh somewhere else. Or you could try to work the land yourself, though that would be hard for anyone alone, let alone." "A weak woman," Aurora supplied, a hint of challenge in her voice. Samuel's gaze snapped to her face. "I was going to say someone injured, but I take your point." His expression softened. "I've never thought you weak, Aurora, not for a moment." She looked down at her hands, weathered from years of work despite her youth. "What would you do if you were me?" "I'd consider partnerships," he said carefully. "Find someone trustworthy to help work the land, share the profits." Aurora studied his face in the fading light. "Someone like you," a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I suppose I might be suitable." "As a business partner," Aurora clarified, her heart suddenly beating faster. Samuel turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. "I'd like to be more than that given time, but I'd start as whatever you need me to be: friend, partner, protector." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I won't pressure you, Aurora. You've had enough men trying to control your life. Whatever happens between us has to be your choice, freely made." Aurora felt tears prick her eyes at his understanding. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "Everything's happening so fast." "Then we'll take it slow." He squeezed her hand reassuringly, one step at a time. The boarding house was quiet that night, most travelers having continued on after the storm passed. Aurora lay awake in her small room, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and settling of the building. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future one where she wasn't constantly afraid, where she had a home that was truly hers, and perhaps someone to share it with. The journey to Helena took longer than expected due to muddy roads, but they arrived just as the territorial office was closing. Samuel charmed the clerk into staying a few minutes longer, and by sunset, Aurora held official papers declaring her the legal owner of her father's homestead, a modest property of 80 acres with a small cabin and creek access. "It's really mine," she whispered, staring at the documents in disbelief. "He can't take it from me now," Samuel smiled, pride evident in his expression. "No, he can't. You're a landowner now, Miss Dawson." They celebrated with dinner at Helena's finest restaurant, a luxury Aurora had never experienced. Over beef steak and apple pie, they discussed practical matters: when to return to Willow Creek, how to handle Jacob's inevitable fury, what supplies would be needed to make the homestead livable. "I should go with you when you confront Jacob," Samuel insisted. "He won't take this well." Aurora nodded, grateful for his support but determined to stand her own ground. "I need to face him myself, but having you there will help." They returned to Willow Creek 3 days later, the cattle sold and profits secured. Samuel's ranch hands rode ahead while he accompanied Aurora to town. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the general store, Jacob was waiting, his expression thunderous. "So the runaway returns," he sneered, blocking the doorway. "Thought you'd crawl back when your money ran out." Aurora straightened her spine, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm not crawling, Jacob. I'm here for my things, and to inform you that I'll be taking up residence at my homestead." Jacob laughed harshly. "What homestead?" "Everything Pa owned belongs to me now." Wordlessly, Aurora produced the official documents. Jacob snatched them, his face darkening as he read. "This is forged," he spat. "You can't own property, you're a woman." "The territorial office disagrees," Samuel interjected calmly. "As do the territorial laws, which have recognized women's property rights for several years now." Jacob's hand moved toward his belt, where a knife hung in a leather sheath. Samuel tensed beside Aurora, but she stepped forward, her voice steady. "You can fight this and lose, Jacob, or you can accept that I've claimed what's rightfully mine and nothing more." She gestured toward the store. "The business is still yours. I don't want it. All I want is what my father left specifically to me." For a long moment, Jacob's face contorted with rage. Then, surprisingly, he deflated, something like grudging respect flickering in his eyes. "Fine. Take the worthless homestead. It's nothing but hard work and loneliness out there." He stepped aside, allowing Aurora to enter the store. "Get your things and get out." Aurora collected her few personal belongings quickly, aware of Jacob's glowering presence and Samuel's protective watch. When she had packed everything into a single trunk, Samuel loaded it onto his wagon without comment. As they prepared to leave, Jacob called after them. "She won't last a month out there, Prescott. Too weak to handle frontier life alone." Samuel turned back, his arm sliding protectively around Aurora's waist. "She's strong enough for me," he said simply, "and she won't be alone." The homestead was in better condition than Aurora had feared. The cabin was small but sound, with a stone fireplace and 2 rooms. The land around it was overgrown but fertile, with the promised creek burbling along the eastern boundary. "It needs work," Samuel acknowledged as they stood in the doorway of what would be her home, "but it has good bones." Aurora stepped inside, running her fingers along the rough-hewn table her father had built. "It's perfect." Samuel helped her settle in, bringing supplies from his own ranch and spending days repairing the roof and chopping firewood. His ranch hands contributed labor too, clearing fields and mending fences, though Aurora insisted on working alongside them despite her still healing ankle. "You don't have to prove anything," Samuel told her one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset. "No one doubts your strength." Aurora smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm not trying to prove anything, I just want to learn. This is my land and I need to know how to care for it." Samuel's arm tightened around her. "Our land," he corrected softly, "if you'll have me as a partner." Aurora turned to face him, her heart full. "What kind of partnership did you have in mind, Mr. Prescott?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "The permanent kind, Miss Dawson." He reached into his pocket, producing a simple silver ring. "I've been carrying this for a week, waiting for the right moment." His voice grew serious. I know it's fast. I know you're just starting to find your independence. But I swear to you, Aurora, I don't want to take that from you. I want to build something with you as equals. Aurora stared at the ring, emotions flooding through her: fear, hope, longing, and something deeper that she was finally ready to name. I love you, she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. I didn't expect to, not so soon, but I do. Samuel's face lit with joy. And I love you. So very much. He slid the ring onto her finger, then cradled her face in his hands. You are the strongest woman I've ever known, Aurora Dawson. It would be my greatest honor to stand beside you as your husband. Aurora wound her arms around his neck, pressing her forehead to his. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I'll marry you. Their lips met in a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, respect, and love. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across what was now their land, Aurora knew she had found not just safety and freedom, but a future brighter than she had ever dared to dream. The wedding took place that autumn, a simple ceremony in the meadow beside their cabin. The entire community attended, even Jacob, who came briefly to give Aurora a stiff nod of acknowledgement before departing. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. As Aurora and Samuel danced under stars as bright as her hopes for their future, she reflected on how far she had come from that beaten girl in the general store. She had found her strength not in spite of her struggles, but because of them, and in doing so, had found a love that would nurture rather than diminish her spirit. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Prescott?" Samuel murmured against her hair as they swayed to the fiddle's melody. Aurora smiled up at her husband, her heart overflowing with contentment. "I'm thinking that sometimes being thought weak can be a gift." Samuel raised an eyebrow questioningly. "If Jacob hadn't underestimated me, if he hadn't been so certain I would fail," she explained, "I might never have found the courage to leave, and I might never have found you." Samuel drew her closer, his arms strong and gentle around her waist. "Then I'm grateful for his mistake. Because you, my love, are the strongest person I know and exactly right for me." As the music played on and their friends celebrated around them, Aurora and Samuel held each other close. Two spirits who had found in each other not just love, but the freedom to be their truest selves, she with her quiet strength, he with his protective heart, building together a life where neither would ever again be deemed too weak or too different to belong.